My name is Carla J. Todd, and I'm 31 years old. Ever been the person everyone leans on, but no one actually respects? That has been my life for years. I worked my butt off, built everything on my own, and somehow still got treated like a teenage screw-up living in my parents' basement. Except flip it, because it was my parents living in my house. A few years back, I bought my first big place, worth about $750,000. I didn't get lucky. I didn't win anything. I'm a financial analyst. I did the MBA thing, climbed the ladder faster than most people climb out of bed, took on extra projects, lived on spreadsheets and coffee and late nights. The plan was simple. Buy the house, live in it alone, maybe eventually share it with a boyfriend if I ever found someone worth my time. Instead, within 2 months, my parents showed up with suitcases like it was some surprise vacation. My dad's construction business had gone belly up again, and apparently their landlord had suddenly decided to sell their place. Convenient timing, right? My mom stood in my kitchen with that soft voice she uses when she wants something and said, "Just temporary, only until we get back on our feet." Fast forward 3 years, still here, still freeloading. Their feet must have been amputated because they sure as hell never got back on them. And me. I paid for everything. Mortgage, groceries, utilities, their car insurance, their phone plans. You would think bankrolling 2 adults would earn you at least basic respect. Wrong. My parents are the type who could watch me cure cancer and still complain that my sister Heather, 29, gave them grandkids. Heather, by the way, is the golden child. Dropped out of community college after her first kid, married Keith, a decent guy who definitely got more than he bargained for. And now she gets paraded around as the perfect daughter, like she's royalty. Every time Heather walks in with her 3 kids, it's like the president arrived. My dad practically stands and salutes. "There's my girl," he says, hugging her like she just returned from a military tour. Meanwhile, I could walk in, holding the deed to the house they live in for free, and I'd get a half-hearted, "Hey, Carla," without eye contact. Last Thanksgiving was peak comedy. I roasted the turkey, bought all the sides, set the table like a Food Network special. Heather walked in with a box of grocery store brownies. Guess which one my parents wouldn't shut up about? Heather makes the best desserts. Yeah, because Betty Crocker really nailed that recipe. Their entitlement was almost impressive. One day my mom sighed loud enough to wake the dead and said, "Carla, you really should think about helping your sister with a down payment. It's only fair since you don't have a family to support." I laughed. Not a polite laugh. A full body, "Are you out of your mind?" laugh. "Fair," I said. "You mean fair like me, covering your rent, your food, your bills, while Heather brings brownies and gets a standing ovation." Mom gave me that wounded look moms use when they want to guilt trip you. Didn't work. I wasn't a kid anymore. My dad loved pretending he was too good for responsibility. He'd sit at the table scrolling job ads like he was running the Pentagon. Every now and then he'd sigh and say, "The job market's just terrible." Back in his day, you could walk onto a site and get hired on the spot. Back in his day, I reminded him, he also tanked 2 businesses and borrowed from me to buy a truck he still hadn't paid off. That usually earned me a death glare. Facts don't lie. My friends couldn't believe I put up with it. But here's the thing. I thought I was playing the long game. People who live off others always get sloppy. And when they get sloppy, you want receipts. Not metaphorical. Literal. Because I knew one day they'd try to flip the story. Claim it was a family effort. Claim they helped me. Claim they deserved part of what I owned. So I kept everything. Utility bills, credit card statements, bank transfers. Every payment I made that kept their lives running. I had folders for it, because if the day ever came, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to bury them with facts. The disrespect wasn't new, but it was getting louder. My dad would make jokes at dinner about me signing the house over to them when I finally settled down. He said it like it was inevitable, like the house belonged to them by default. I laughed in his face and said, "Not happening. This house stays mine." But that was the first time I realized something important. Those jokes weren't jokes. They were tests, seed planting, feeling out how gullible I was. And if I knew anything about my parents, it was that if they thought they could trick me, they would. I didn't know when the breaking point would come, but I knew it was coming. Because entitlement doesn't stop at groceries and utility bills, it escalates. And my parents were already looking at my house like it was their retirement plan. Living with my parents was like watching people play house with my money, like it was Monopoly. They strutted around like they owned the place, while I footed every bill. And it wasn't even the big expenses that wore me down. It was the little moments, the casual entitlement, slipping out like they were proud of it. One Monday morning, I was heading out the door in a suit, laptop bag ready, when my dad stopped me in the hallway holding the gas bill. "Hey, you should probably pay this before they shut it off," he said, like he was doing me a favor. I took the bill and stared at it. "Whose name is on it?" He looked down and muttered, "Yours," then tossed it on the counter and went back to scrolling on his phone like a retiree. No embarrassment, no accountability, just assumption. My mom wasn't any different. One week she cornered me in the kitchen and said, "Carla, you eat too much takeout. It's expensive." I stared at her. "You mean the takeout I pay for, including the stuff you eat too?" Without blinking, she said, "Family shares." I shot back, "Family also contributes. Want to guess which one is missing?" She didn't answer. She just shuffled off, muttering about me being too focused on money. That was their favorite insult, that I cared too much about money, which was hilarious considering they cared about my money enough to live off it. Anytime I called them out, my mom would shift into that practice guilt trip tone. "Maybe if you weren't so focused on work, you'd have a husband and kids." I would smile and say, "Maybe if Dad wasn't so focused on failing businesses, he wouldn't be living in his daughter's guest room." That usually ended the conversation. Heather didn't help. She acted like the situation was a quirky flex. One time she asked me why I never bragged about having our parents live with me. I told her it's because adults don't brag about raising their own parents. That shut her up for a minute, but not for long. Keith, my brother-in-law, was the only one who seemed to get it. One night after dinner at my house, he joined me outside while the kids ran around in the yard. He leaned against the railing and said, "I don't know how you do it." "If your parents pulled this?" I asked. He shook his head. "I'd lose it." He looked like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Can't blame him. He married into it. What they didn't know was that I'd been keeping receipts. Not metaphorical, literal. Every utility bill, every credit card statement, every time I paid their car insurance, every just until next month transfer. I had folders for all of it because I knew one day they would try to flip the story. They'd claim they helped me buy the house, that they contributed, that it was family property. And the seeds were already being planted. My dad started making comments at dinner, half joking, about how the house should stay in the family if something happened to me. My mom would nod along and say things like, "It's just smart planning." Then they started pushing the idea of moving closer to Heather. Not directly, not yet. Just little sighs about how they missed the grandkids, how the neighborhood near Heather was so charming, how it would be nice to have a place of their own again. Every time, they said it like I was supposed to be inspired to fund the dream. The disrespect kept escalating. My dad would complain about the Wi-Fi being slow as if he paid for it. My mom would criticize how I stocked the fridge as if she had any right to opinions on groceries she never bought. They would talk about my house like it was a shared asset, like my name on the deed was a technicality and their presence was ownership. And through all of it, Heather kept getting praised for breathing. She'd show up late with the kids, dump them in the living room, and my parents would act like she had performed a miracle. "There's my girl," Dad would say, hugging her. Mom would fuss over her hair, her outfit, her stress. Meanwhile, I'd be in the kitchen washing dishes from a meal I paid for, listening to them talk about how hard Heather had it. One night I asked my mom, "Do you hear yourself?" She blinked at me innocently. "What do you mean?" "You talk about her like she's the only child you have." Her face tightened for a second, then softened into that familiar disappointment. "Carla, you're so sensitive." Sensitive. That was their word for me whenever I asked to be treated like a person. But my patience was shifting. It wasn't just endurance anymore. It was timing, because the jokes were getting too specific. The hints were getting too direct. They weren't just freeloading. They were planning something. And if my parents were good at one thing, it was finding a way to make their selfishness sound like family duty. I didn't know how they were going to try it yet, but I knew it was coming. Then one random Wednesday afternoon, they made the decision for me. It was a Wednesday. Nothing dramatic about it. No holiday, no argument. Just a regular afternoon that should have been boring. I left work early because a meeting wrapped ahead of schedule. I remember thinking I might actually make it to the gym before dinner for once. I pulled into the driveway and noticed the house was unusually quiet. Lights were on, no TV noise, no clatter in the kitchen. I let myself in through the side door. Habit. Quiet. That's when I heard my father's voice. He was in the spare bedroom he'd claimed as his office. It was really just storage with a desk shoved into the corner. But he liked pretending he was running a business empire from it. At first, it sounded like a normal phone call. Yes, Stan, we're still living here. What choice do we have? Market's insane right now. Same script. Blame the economy, never himself. I was about to walk past when he said something that stopped me cold. That girl's just a walking wallet I'm using. Beyond that, she doesn't deserve to exist. Heather's my real achievement. The words didn't hit like a punch, they hit like confirmation. There it is. No more wondering. No more doubting whether I was overreacting. Stan said something muffled on the other end, but Dad kept going, his voice dripping with disgust. She makes money, sure, but what kind of life is that? 31, single, married to her job, pathetic, and the worst part, she acts like we should thank her for letting us live here. Like I don't choke every time someone asks what I do, and I have to say my daughter supports me. I leaned against the wall, calm, not shaking, not crying, just done. Then my mom's voice joined in. The door creaked open and she stepped into the room. Who are you talking to? Just catching up, Dad replied. There was a pause. Then Mom lowered her voice. Did you tell him our plan? Plan. Dad chuckled. Not yet. But we'll get her to sign the house over sooner or later. We'll sell it and finally get something near Heather. That's the dream, Mom laughed. Actually laughed. Carla's so focused on work, she'll sign whatever paperwork we put in front of her if we spin it right. She never reads the fine print. I didn't move. I didn't breathe louder. I just let every word sink in. They weren't just freeloading. They were planning to steal it. The house. The last thing in my life that was fully mine. 3 years of paying for their lives. And now they wanted the title too. You'd think I would storm in, slam the door open, confront them, scream. That's what they expected. Because if I yelled, they'd call me unstable. If I cried, they'd call me dramatic. If I confronted them, they'd gaslight me into thinking I misheard. So I did none of that. I turned around, walked out the same way I came in, got into my car and drove. No destination, just distance. I ended up sitting in my car in the parking lot of my gym, staring at the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with work emails, but I ignored them. I replayed every word. Doesn't deserve to exist. Real achievement. Get her to sign it over. And something inside me shifted. For years, I thought I was tolerating them out of loyalty, out of guilt, out of obligation. But they weren't tolerating me. They were strategizing. That night, I came home like nothing happened. Ate dinner. Nodded when Mom complained about grocery prices. Listened while Dad talked about Heather's neighborhood again. They had no idea I'd heard. Perfect. Because the second they said sign it over, the situation stopped being emotional. It became tactical. The next morning before work, I sat in my car and made 3 calls. Financial advisor, realtor, lawyer. I didn't ask whether I should. I asked how fast. The first call was to my financial advisor, Trevor. Trevor, I said, what does it look like if I sell my house quickly and relocate? He didn't even pretend to misunderstand. Everything okay? Better than ever, I replied. I just need numbers. Within 20 minutes, he was outlining market projections. The neighborhood was hot. Inventory was low. We could list high and still get multiple offers. I told him I wanted it gone fast. Not emotionally fast. Legally fast. The second call was to Natalie, a realtor who specialized in discreet, efficient sales for professionals who didn't want drama. She toured the property while my parents were out at brunch. This will move, she said, already calculating angles. You sure? Very. The third call was to my lawyer, Patricia. I need to protect myself from internal sabotage, I told her, and I need to make sure no one can claim implied family interest. She laughed softly. We're past implied. We're into attempted acquisition. She drafted everything. Clean, tight, no wiggle room. Here's the part they never knew. A year earlier, I had quietly purchased a penthouse downtown. 2-bedroom, skyline view, rooftop access, gym, paid mostly in cash. I never mentioned it to my family because I already understood how their minds worked. If they knew about it, they'd start imagining their names on that deed too. The penthouse wasn't an impulse purchase. It was instinct. Some part of me had always known I would need an exit hatch. So when my parents were in the kitchen complaining about grocery brands, I was reviewing listing photos. When my dad was making jokes about signing the house over one day, I was scheduling private showings. I timed the first open house for when they were at Heather's for Sunday brunch. 40 families walked through that property. Several left offers the same day. By Monday, we had a clean cash buyer willing to close in 21 days. I didn't announce it. I didn't threaten. I simply served them written notice that the property had sold and the contract required vacant possession at closing. They stared at the paper like it was written in another language. You can't just sell our home, my mother said. Our? I asked calmly. The deed says Carla J. Todd. My father tried authority. You owe us discussion. I owe you notice, I replied. You have 21 days. The next week felt like living inside a storm cloud. My mother stopped speaking to me unless it was to sigh dramatically. My father walked around muttering about betrayal. Heather showed up one evening looking panicked. Are you serious? Completely. You're going to make them homeless. They have options, I said. They just don't involve my property. That's when I dropped the part they really weren't prepared for. I already have another place, I added casually. Downtown. They blinked. A penthouse, I clarified. I've owned it for over a year. The silence in that living room was thick enough to choke on. They had assumed I'd be scrambling. That if I sold, I'd be destabilized too. That we'd all be in chaos together and they could manipulate from there. But I wasn't scrambling. I was relocating. Closing day arrived exactly on schedule. The buyers wired funds. I signed the final documents. The locks were changed that afternoon. My parents were still standing in the driveway when the new owners arrived. I watched from my car across the street as the movers loaded their boxes. I didn't feel victorious. I felt light. That night, I slept in my penthouse. The city lights spread below me like a reminder that perspective changes everything. Meanwhile, my parents were calling Heather, and that was where the real collapse began. For exactly 48 hours, my parents believed Heather would be their soft landing. They showed up at her house with boxes, indignation, and the assumption that blood automatically equals accommodation. Keith answered the door. From what Heather later told me, he didn't even argue at first. He just stepped aside and let them in. That was mistake number 1. Within 3 days, the pattern reappeared. Dad took over the living room TV like it was a command center, critiqued Keith's cooking, complained about how small the house felt. Mom made passive-aggressive comments about Heather's parenting, about how noisy the kids were, about how this wasn't temporary enough. Keith lasted a week. He called me one night. You weren't exaggerating, he said quietly. They don't contribute. They don't even try. They just assume. I know, I replied. They told Heather you'll come around, that you're bluffing. I almost laughed. I don't bluff. By week 2, Keith snapped. Apparently, Dad criticized how he handled the electric bill. Keith looked him dead in the eye and said, if you don't like it, leave. And just like that, Heather's house was no longer available. From there, my parents rotated through extended relatives, cousin Elena for 5 days, an old church friend for 3, a former neighbor for 1 very uncomfortable weekend. Each time, the same complaints followed them, the same entitlement, the same refusal to adapt. They landed eventually in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town. Beige carpet, flickering hallway lights, the kind of place my father used to mock when he talked about ambition. It was poetic. Meanwhile, my life stabilized into something almost unfamiliar. Peace. The penthouse felt different every morning. Sunlight through floor-to-ceiling windows. Coffee on the balcony. No sighs in the kitchen. No passive-aggressive comments about how much I worked. Work thrived too. Without emotional distraction, I closed deals faster, took on bigger projects. The energy I used to waste managing guilt and manipulation now fueled actual growth. Then came the lawsuit. Yes, they tried. 2 months after closing, I was served papers. They claimed I had verbally promised to keep the house as a family trust, that selling it violated a moral agreement. Moral agreement. My lawyer didn't even hide her smile. This won't just be dismissed, she said. It'll be laughed out. She was right. Court lasted under an hour. The judge asked for written agreements. They had none. Asked for evidence of shared investment. None. Asked whether I was the sole owner on the deed. Yes. Dismissed. My parents walked out of that courtroom smaller than I'd ever seen them. But here's the part no one anticipates. They didn't collapse because they lost the house. They collapsed because the illusion ended. For years, they framed me as the selfish one, the cold daughter obsessed with money, the one who didn't value family. But when they sued and lost publicly, that narrative cracked. Extended family started asking questions. Neighbors whispered. Even church friends distanced themselves. Their reputation deteriorated faster than their finances. One night, about a month after the lawsuit failed, my phone rang. It was Dad. I almost didn't answer. Carla, he said, voice thinner than I'd ever heard it. Rent's overdue. Your mother's sick. We can't keep this up. Please. There it was. The pivot. From authority to desperation. You told Stan I shouldn't exist, I said calmly. Remember that? Silence. You said Heather was your real achievement. He inhaled sharply. You made your choice, I continued. Act like I don't exist. And I hung up. No rage, no screaming, just completion. Because here's the truth. The opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. They didn't lose me when I sold the house. They lost me when they decided I was just a resource. And once someone becomes a resource in your eyes, they eventually learn to become unavailable. After that phone call, something shifted. Not in them, in me. For years, I had lived in reaction mode, anticipating manipulation, bracing for guilt, preparing arguments in my head before I even walked into my own kitchen. Even after selling the house, even after the lawsuit collapsed, some part of me had still been waiting for the next blow. But that call was different. It wasn't threatening, it wasn't arrogant, it was weak. And weakness doesn't inspire revenge, it inspires clarity. They weren't masterminds. They weren't villains in a movie script. They were simply two people who built their entire identity around leaning on someone else. When that support disappeared, they had nothing underneath it. Heather called me a week later, not to argue, not to defend them, just to talk. "They're not doing well," she said quietly. I figured. "They keep saying you'll come back around." "I won't." There was a long pause. "You know," she continued, "when you dropped those receipts on the table, that was the first time I realized they'd been using you." I didn't respond right away. "I thought they were helping me with school fees," she admitted. "I didn't know it was you." "That wasn't an accident," I said. "No," she whispered. For the first time in our lives, there was no competition between us, no invisible scoreboard, just two adults acknowledging the truth. "They're mad at me too now," she added, "because Keith won't give them money." I almost smiled. "Welcome to reality," Heather sighed. "I think they honestly believed you'd never follow through." That part stung more than the insult, because she was right. My entire life I had absorbed, adjusted, given in, let them take the bike, the laptop, the money, the house support. They assumed that pattern would continue. What they never understood was this: the person who stays quiet the longest isn't weak. They're watching. 6 months passed. I stopped checking for missed calls, stopped anticipating guilt letters. The silence from their side became permanent. Word filtered back that Dad had picked up odd construction jobs. Mom found part-time retail work. No more country club fantasies, no more retirement bragging. Just rent, groceries, bills, the exact responsibilities they once shrugged off. One evening, standing on my balcony, looking at the city lights stretching endlessly in front of me, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't hate them. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt distance. Sometimes people expect a dramatic moral lesson at the end of stories like this, a reconciliation, a tearful reunion. That didn't happen. They never apologized in a way that wasn't tied to need. I never reopened the door. And that's okay, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming space. Reclaiming my house, my finances, my mental bandwidth, my identity. I used to think family meant obligation. That blood required endurance. That being the good daughter meant sacrificing more than anyone else. Now I know better. Family is not access to your assets. It's access to your respect. And respect isn't automatic. It's earned. When I look back now, I don't see a daughter who turned on her parents. I see a woman who stopped being an ATM. And once that role ended, everything else fell into place. The penthouse is quiet. Work is steady. My life belongs to me. They thought I'd regret it. I don't. Because the moment I stopped financing their illusion was the moment I started living my own reality. A year after everything settled, I thought the story was over. No more lawsuits, no more late-night begging calls, no more family group chats exploding with drama. Just silence. The kind of silence you earn after you finally stop participating in chaos. Then one Sunday afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. I answered. "Carla?" The voice was older, fragile. It took me a second to place it. My Aunt Rosa, my mom's sister, the one who always stayed neutral, the one who said, "There are two sides to every story," while conveniently never choosing one. "Yes." There was a long pause. Then she said quietly, "Your father had a stroke." The word didn't hit like thunder. It landed like a dull thud in my chest. "He's alive," she added quickly. "But it was serious. They're at County General." County General. Not the private hospital he used to brag about. Not the one with the valet parking and marble floors. County. I didn't speak right away. I stared at the skyline through my living room window. "You don't have to come," she said softly. "I just thought you should know." I hung up and stood there for a long time. For years I had imagined this scenario. Some emergency, some crisis, the moment where everyone expected me to step back into the role of dutiful daughter. But something felt different now. I wasn't 15 anymore. I wasn't 25. I wasn't the girl trying to earn approval with spreadsheets and mortgage payments. I was 32, independent, detached, clear. I drove to the hospital anyway. Not because I felt obligated, but because I needed to see what closure looked like in real life. The room smelled like antiseptic and stale air. My mom was sitting in a plastic chair by the bed, thinner than I remembered, smaller. She looked up when I walked in. For a second, there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen in years. Not entitlement, not strategy, just exhaustion. "You came," she whispered. I heard. My father lay in the bed, pale, tubes running from his arms. He looked nothing like the man who once stood in my kitchen bragging about control. He opened his eyes slowly when he heard my voice. "Carla?" It wasn't angry, it wasn't demanding, it wasn't proud, it was quiet. "I don't have long attention these days," he said, slurring slightly. "Doctors say recovery is possible, but—" He swallowed hard. I wanted to say something before I didn't get the chance. My mom shifted in her seat but stayed silent. He looked at me, and for once there was no performance behind it. "We thought you'd never leave," he admitted. "That no matter what we said, you'd stay." There it was again, the assumption. "You didn't respect me enough to think I would," I replied calmly. He nodded weakly. "We were wrong." My mom's voice broke. "We thought family meant permanence." "It does," I said, "but permanence isn't ownership." Silence settled in the room like dust. For the first time in years, no one was trying to manipulate the narrative. No guilt, no lectures, no financial angles. Just consequences sitting in hospital lighting. "I don't expect forgiveness," my father said finally, "but I do regret underestimating you." Underestimating me. Not regretting the money, not regretting the lawsuit, regretting the assumption. I stood there for a moment, then stepped closer to the bed. "I don't hate you," I said quietly, "but I'm not going back." He nodded again. No argument, no anger, and that's when I understood something important. Closure doesn't always come with reconciliation. Sometimes it comes with recognition. I stayed for 30 minutes. We didn't talk about the house, or the penthouse, or the lawsuit, or the humiliation. We talked about neutral things, the weather, the city, the way the skyline looked at night. When I left, my mom followed me into the hallway. "You built a good life," she said softly. "I know." There was a flicker of something like pride in her eyes. Maybe too late, maybe not. "I'm not asking to move in," she added quickly, almost defensively. I gave her the smallest smile. "Good." I drove home through evening traffic, watching the city lights come alive again. I didn't feel pulled back into their gravity. I didn't feel guilt. I felt finished. They once thought I was just the walking wallet, the backup plan, the child who would never actually leave. Now I was the woman who did. And whether they healed or not, I wasn't carrying them anymore.